Like I mentioned today, we're going to be talking about monitoring your quality of life as a caregiver. And this stems from our prior conversation where we had talked about quality of life for our animal companions. And I won't spend too much time on this slide in particular, although we can certainly open this conversation up for more discussion because I think there are definitely parts of quality of life related to our companion animals that are inextricably intertwined with our own experiences of our quality of life as caregivers. And so, reminders from Dr. Montgomery's talk from last time that quality of life is very individual for our companion animals. We look at considerations like their natural functions, whether that be appetite, urination, walking, etc., the level of their pain management, the management of their disease symptoms. And in addition to that, factors like whether they're participating in activities or doing the things that they love to do. And during our last conversation, we talked about a few tools that can help provide more sort of objective data during a time that can feel, again, very fraught and very subjective. And so those tools, again, were the quality of life scale, which is the HHHMM scale, Dr. Busby's quality of life scale, and Lap of Love's quality of life scale. And so all of those scales encompass a few of these different pieces, and they're largely with consideration for the quality of life for our animal companions. Um, what we also want to consider, and is important to consider as well, is the quality of life for ourselves as caregivers. And that Lap of Love scale actually starts to speak a little bit to that. And so, for example, things that might be important considerations when we're thinking about our own quality of life, or a great place to start, I think, include our own beliefs and values. That can be just a really big place to start from. But at the same time, I think some of the questions and things that we can examine in this space could include, what are our spiritual beliefs? What are our past experiences? Values are the things that are the principles that help guide our lives. And sometimes if we take a little bit of time to reflect on that aspect, it can help us give a little bit of sense of what we want to prioritize, especially if things like my biggest value is upholding family. In addition to that, I think specifically because we're talking about questions related to end of life, there can be some really practical questions that we can ask ourselves to help us figure out some of that alignment with our values. And so it could include things like planning for if at the end of my companion's life, do I want to be present with them? What are my thoughts on, treatment? What are my thoughts on what a good life entails, or what are my thoughts on what a good death entails? The next factor that I think has multiple dimensions is this idea of resources. And when I talk about resources, I think there's a couple pieces that I would encourage people to hold. One is resources in the sense of our desire, but also resources in the sense of our ability. And so those two things may not always be well matched together, particularly as it comes to time. We may wish that we had all of the time and ability to be present for our loved ones in a particular way, and that may not be the feasible or practical reality of our lives. And so it's important to take a look at that and what that means. Similarly, with our finances, which I know can be a really challenging piece to consider as well. But all of us have a limitation to how far our finances will be able to extend. And I think that's an important thing to consider when we're talking about both the quality of life for ourselves as well as our companions. When we talk about stamina, we're considering both that physical and emotional strain. And so, again, with that idea of desire and ability, there may be certain physical conditions that a companion animal may have where our own physical abilities might not necessarily lend themselves to caring for them in a particular way. And our emotional capacity is also something that we want to continue to monitor and be aware of. One piece that I thought was really interesting, that came up in our last discussion included this idea of bonds. I think that can be interrelated again with this idea of values and beliefs. Um, Not only the bond that we have with our companion animals, of course, that's certainly at the forefront, but I thought there was some really interesting conversation around the bonds that our companions may have with other companions in the household, or bonds that our companions may have with other loving humans that are a part of their lives. And so, this presentation was fairly short and sweet. I'm going to ask us to maybe open discussion to consider what other considerations there might be for us as caregivers in terms of our own quality of life. But I'm also going to stop the screen share and recording so that we can have that discussion if that serves folks, or touch on any of the prior information, or move wherever feels right for us today.